Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and greetings to everyone. Today, I will be representing the first two parts of our topic, the introduction of secularism and background of the Dark Ages under the topic, the impact of secularism to knowledge and political system. Over the history of mankind, the view and values of society have always had an impact on knowledge and political systems. How people think about knowledge will shape how they think about education, how they form institutions, think about laws, and think about community. Religion was a key factor in tradition society's understanding and governance. Religion was not just a bit reckoning system, but a way to provide guidance in moral values, social institution, and knowledge of human life. But with the advent of secularism, there was a great change in the way people think. Secularism brought with it the notion that knowledge, politics, and social events can be separated from religious power. It highlighted the value of human reasoning, scientific observation, and empirical evidence as important means of understanding the world. In general, the Western European experience has formed the basis of secularism, particularly in the aftermath of wars and experiences between scientific and political breakthroughs and religious institutions. Those who believe in secularism said a divorce of religion and the institutions of state would promote the advancements of science, political freedom, and social equality. But according to Islam, there is a discussion to be had in this separation. Islam considers knowledge to be related to the guidance of God. Knowledge is not just learning facts about the material world, but also responsibilities of human beings towards Allah and society. Secularism tends to separate knowledge from spirituality and can result in the absence of moral and ethical values in learning and education, argues Muhammad Nakib Al-Atas. The debates on secularism is thus not merely political, but also a question of human understanding, of learning and using knowledge. Secularism is a phenomenon that needs to be understood in the context of the history of Europe, especially in the context of so-called Dark Ages. So let's go to the point number two, which is what was happening during the Dark Ages. So before I tell you about the Dark Ages, we must know what the Dark Ages is. So the term Dark Ages is generally used for the early medieval era of Western Europe from the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE until about the 10th century. But contemporary historians suggest that term should be used with caution as it implies that nothing has changed in this whole era. In fact, the Middle Ages saw advance in agriculture, architecture, philosophy, and religious scholarship. During this time, however, Western Europe was in a state of political and economic turmoil, while the intellectual achievements of ancient Greece and Rome flourished. Europe, after the fall of the Roman Empire, was politically divided. Many cities rejected trade systems, weakened, and education was less available. There were also a number of interlopers like Vikings and Magyars that invaded frequently, creating further inconsistencies. Under under these cir- under these circumstances, the monasteries, particularly the Saint Sophia monasteries, came to serve as important centers of knowledge. Monks copied manuscripts and kept libraries and gave education. This led to the church's emergence as one of the most powerful institutions in European society. In this era, the Roman Catholic Church was able to influence many things in people's lives, such as their educations, politics, law, and values. In these early days, the authority of the religious in the political was inextricably linked. as many rules had their legitimacy approved by religious authorities. In this time, many things were understood as knowledge that was theological. This also had implications for the understanding of nature and humanity through religious interpretation. For instance, ideas of science and philosophy were not allowed to conflict with the existing religious belief. If any ideas contradicted the prevailing ideas, intellectual clashes could happen with the religious leaders. A popular scenario is the clash between heliocentric economy and the traditional view of the universe. The relationship of religion and science at this time was a complex one, but the events led to the later notion that religious institutions could hamper scientific development. It is also important to note, however, that older civilizations were dealing with intellectual growth, while in Western Europe these problems were being faced. Muslim scientists and mathematicians during the Islamic Golden Age contribute significantly to the science of mathematics, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and many other areas of knowledge. How of House of Wisdom in Baghdad, etc., became centers of translations, research, and intellectual development. Muslim scholars like Ibn Sina and Al-Khwarizmi developed the ideas that would go on bequeathed to European intellectual development. It is significant that both of these historical experiences differ. In Islamic, the pursuit of knowledge was encouraged, in that it was believed that studying the universe was studying the creation of Allah. There was no separation of knowledge in religion. Rather, religious knowledge and thought were regarded as intertwined. In the medieval Western Europe, however, the merging of religious and political authority led to a conflict of interpretation with the new ideas. These past events were source of religious authority in later European thinkers. This event really led to the Renaissance, scientific revolution, and enlightenment. These movements emphasize human reason, scientific techniques, and free expression of the individual's mind. These ideas eventually grew into significant development of the modern secularism. So to conclude these 2 points, finally it can be concluded that secularism is not a sudden phenomenon, but it has evolving during a long historical period, which has been shaped by the political, intellectual, and social development in Europe. Religious authority and knowledge were important to the experiences of the medieval period, and the relationship between the influenced later religious opposed movements that developed an opposition to religion in public institutions. It is, however, from a Muslim perspective of concern that there is a distinction between knowledge and religion, since Islam sees knowledge as something which is to be guided by ethical and spiritual principles. Knowing the history of secularism thus enables us to critically analyze its contribution to the present mindset of knowledge and its opposition to religious worldviews. So that's all. That's all from me, and thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Imagine living in a world where almost every single question you have about life, the stars, or the government is answered by one authority. For centuries in Europe, the church and the monarchy held absolute power over truth and daily life. But then everything changed. Today we are looking at two massive historical earthquakes that shook the foundation of society. We will explore the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and how these two forces gave birth to modern secularism. Let us start with the Enlightenment. This was an intellectual movement that peaked in the 1700s. Think of it as a massive awakening of the human mind. Thinkers like John Locke and Immanuel Kant started saying something incredibly dangerous for that time. They said we do not need kings or priests. to tell us how the world works. We have our own brains, we have logic, reason, and science, instead of accepting the idea that kings had a divine right to rule from God. Enlightenment philosophers argued that the government should serve the people. They pushed the idea of basic human rights. This was the first major step in questioning traditional religious authority. People started looking through telescopes and microscopes instead of just reading ancient texts. But ideas in books can only change society so much. The real physical shift came with the Industrial Revolution. Starting in Britain, people figured out how to use coal and steam to power massive machines. We went from making things by hands in small rural villages to mass producing goods in huge urban factories. The world became mechanized. This completely changed how regular people lived their daily lives. You no longer wake up with the sun to farm your local land. You woke up to a factory whistle. You moved to a crowded city. The center of your community was no longer the village church. It was a factory and the busy streets. So, how did this lead to secularism? Secularism is the idea that religion and the government should be kept separate. It emerged directly from these two movements. Because of the Enlightenment, people already believed that society should be run by logic and reason, not religious laws. Then, the Industrial Revolution made this a practical necessity. When millions of people cram into cities to work, you get new problems. You get diseases, outbreaks, house shortages, and the need for mass education, public health policies, and standardized law to function. The church simply could not manage a modern industrial economy. Therefore, the government stepped in and took over things like education and social welfare. Furthermore, cities brought people of all different backgrounds and beliefs together. If a city government tried to enforce one specific religion on all its factory workers, it would cause massive conflict and stop economic progress. To keep the peace and keep the factories running, the state had to become neutral. It had to become secular. Religion became a private matter for your home and your weekends, while the public work of work, politics, and science operates strictly on secular rules. Ultimately, the world we live in today was forced by these events. The Enlightenment gave us the idea of reason and human rights. The Industrial Revolution gave us the technology and the urban society together. Together, they pushed religious authority out of the government, allowing secularism to emerge and build the modern world. Thanks for watching.
Assalamualaikum, my name is BAIHAQI. Next, I will be presenting about what secularism promotes and how it impacts knowledge. So first, secularism is a philosophy that believes human life should be guided mainly by reason, science, and human experience rather than religious teachings. Instead of relying on religion to solve social and political issues, secularism encourages people to use logic, evidence, and critical thinking. According to Noraini and colleagues, secularism promotes an ethical system that teaches people how to live based on human abilities and worldly experiences without referring to religions. Its main objective is to separate worldly affairs from religious authority. Supporters of secularism argue that this separation helps create a society where people of different religions can live together peacefully. Since government do not favor one religion over another, everyone is treated equally under the same law. Another important idea is that secularism promotes scientific inquiry and rational thinking. Secularists believe that progress should be driven by research, observation, and evidence rather than religious doctrine. Because of this, secularism is often associated with modernization, technological development, and innovation. While in the politic aspect, Secularism promotes the separation between religious institutions and the government. However, different countries apply secularism differently. For example, France follows what is known as assertive secularism, which religion is largely kept out of public institutions, while in the United States, it follows passive secularism, where religion is allowed to be visible in public life while the government remains neutral. Overall, secularism promotes several important principles, including equal rights, freedom of religions, human rights, equality before the law, and tolerance towards people of different beliefs. Next, how does secularism impact the knowledge growth? One of the greatest contributions of secularism is its role in the development of modern science. When scientific research became independent from religious authority, scientists gained greater freedom to question existing beliefs, conduct experiments, and develop new ideas. This encouraged rapid progress in fields such as medicine, engineering, physics, and technology. The sociologist Max Weber described this process as the disenchantment of nature, where scientific reasoning gradually replaced explanation based on myth, traditions, and superstition. As a result, secularism became closely connected with scientific advancement and modernization. However, this relationship has also received criticism. Some scholars argue that secular education separates science from religion, which create what they describe as valueless knowledge. Students may gain technical knowledge and professional skills, but receive less guidance on the ethics part, the morality, and the spiritual values. The separation can be seen in many modern educational systems, where religion is taught as an independent subject instead of being integrated across different fields of knowledge. Research by Evans in 2022 found an interesting result, which is his study showed that students who studied subjects emphasizing critical inquiry were more likely to adopt secular worldviews than students studying subjects focused mainly on practical application. This suggests that the process of critical inquiry itself may encourage more secular ways of thinking. From an Islamic perspective, scholars such as Sayyid Muhammad Naqib al-Abtas argue that separating religion from knowledge creates an imbalance. Islam teaches that all knowledge ultimately comes from one single source, which is Allah, and should contribute to developing both intellectual ability and moral character. Because of this, Al-Abtas introduced the idea of the Islamization of knowledge, which aims to integrate modern scientific knowledge with Islamic values instead of treating them as two separate parts. Therefore, while secularism has greatly contributed to scientific progress and technological development, many scholars believe that knowledge should not only produce intelligent individuals but also ethical and responsible human beings. In conclusion, secularism has played an important role in advancing science and education, but it has also raised important questions about the relationship between knowledge, morality, and religion. Finding a balance between scientific progress and ethical values remains an important challenge for both secular and religious societies. Thank you.
Since Islam is a comprehensive way of life that guides not only worship but also ethics, law, education, and governance, the spread of secularism has had significant effects on Muslim societies. These impacts can be seen in four main areas. The first one is in Islamic worldview, education, politics, and the last one is social life. First, let's take a look at the impact on Islamic beliefs and worldview. Islam teaches that every aspect of life should be guided by the teachings of Allah. Worship, family life, business, politics, and social relationship are all connected to religion. However, secularism encourages religion to remain mainly in the private sphere. This means that public institutions and government decisions are expected to function without relying on religious teachings. According to Syed Muhammad Naqib Al-Attas, this separation can lead to what he calls the loss of adab, which refers to the loss of proper understanding of knowledge, ethics, and responsibility. When religious guidance becomes less influential in public life, people may begin making decisions based only on personal interests, material success, or human reasoning instead of Islamic principles. And as the end result, Muslims may experience challenges when secular values differ from Islamic teachings on issues such as family relationships, modesty, financial ethics, and moral behavior. However, it is also important to note that Muslims do not all respond to secularism in the same way. Some believe that living in a secular country still allows them to practice Islam freely, while respecting people of different religion. The second impact is on education and knowledge. Traditionally, Islamic civilization viewed knowledge as a unified concept. Religious science and worldly science such as mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and architecture were studied together because all knowledge was believed to come from Allah. With the development of secular education, many schools and universities separated religious studies from scientific and professional education. Modern education often focuses on science, technology, economics, and career development, while religion becomes a separate subject rather than foundation of learning. Al-Attas argues that this separation may produce graduates with strong technical skills but weaker in morals and spiritual foundations. On the other hand, secular education has also brought positive contributions. It has expanded access to higher education, scientific research, and technology innovation. In today's world, Muslims continue to make important contributions in fields such as medicine, engineering, architecture, and IT. Therefore, many contemporary Muslim scholars recommend integrating modern scientific knowledge with Islamic ethics instead of treating them as separate fields. Moving on to the third impact, which is on politics and governance. In Islamic tradition, religion and governance have always been closely connected. Leaders are expected to establish justice while following Islamic values. In secular political systems, however, religion and government are separated. Laws are usually created through constitutions, democratic institutions, and civil legislation instead of relying directly on religious law. Many Muslim majority countries have adopted some of the secular legal system, especially during the 20th century. In some countries, Islamic law is mainly applied to family matters such as marriage and inheritance, while criminal and constitutional laws follow civil legal systems. This eventually has created different opinions among Muslims. Some believe secular government helps protect religious freedom and ensure equal rights for citizens from religious background. On the other hand, there are people who argue that reducing the role of Islam in governance weakens moral guidance and social justice because public policies are no longer based on Islamic principles. Countries such as Malaysia and Indonesia and Turkey demonstrate that there is no single model. Each country has developed a different relationship between religion and state based on its own society and history. Finally, the social and cultural impact. Globalization, social media, entertainment, and consumer culture have accelerated the spread of secular values throughout the world. Many scholars believe this has influenced lifestyle choices, family relationships, fashion, and priorities of younger generations. For some Muslims, maintaining religious identity has become more challenging because modern society often emphasizes individual freedom and personal success over collective religious responsibilities. However, secular societies have also allowed Muslims in many countries to establish mosques, Islamic schools, charitable organizations, and community centers under laws that protect freedom of religion. This shows that secularism does not necessarily prevent Muslims from practicing Islam. Instead, many Muslims continue to preserve their religious identity while actively participating in modern multicultural societies. To conclude, secularism has influenced Muslims in many aspects of life, including their religious worldview, education, political system, and social values. Some scholars believe secularism weakens the role of Islam in public life by separating religion from governance and education, while others argue that secular societies can still provide Muslims with the freedom to practice their faith while participating in diverse communities. Therefore, the impact of secularism is quite complex. Rather than affecting every Muslim in the same way, its influence depends on each country's history, legal system, and culture, and also the commitment of individual Muslims to their faith.